Okay, so like, grocery shopping these days, it can be kind of a stressful thing.
Yeah.
Prices are just going up and up, and sometimes you go to the store and like the shelves are kind of bare.
Yeah, it's a little unnerving, isn't it?
It really is, and it just makes you wonder, like our politics, is what's happening in Washington actually like affecting, what I'm putting in my shopping cart?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's that connection between like the big picture stuff and your everyday life.
Yeah, exactly. And so today we are going deep into an article that was in Vanguard News just yesterday, December 31st, 2024. And it's called U.S. Farmers Fret Over Trump's Deportation Plans.
Hmm.
So Trump, of course, just won the election, and one of his big campaign promises was that he was going to deport, millions of people who are here illegally. And this has a lot of farmers, especially ones who rely on immigrant labor, really kind of worried.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge part of the workforce in agriculture.
Right. And the article talks about this guy, Joe Del Bosque. He's 75 years old. He's from California, and he's been growing cantaloupes and almonds like his whole life.
Wow.
And he really relies on immigrant labor. And he said this, and I think this is really interesting. He said, when they're needed, they welcome them. When they don't need them, they want to kick them out. Well, right now, the country doesn't know that they do need some of these workers.
Yeah, I mean, there's a real disconnect there, right? Like, we need these workers, but the political climate is so against them.
Right. It's this weird tension.
Absolutely.
And it's not just, guys like Joe growing fruit. It's also the dairy industry.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And they're feeling it too. There's this guy, Rick Nairabout, who's the head of the Idaho Dairy Producers Association. And he says it would be devastating to the industry if they lost their skilled immigrant workers.
Makes sense. I mean, you need people who know what they're doing, especially with something as sensitive as dairy.
Yeah, he said it would only take a couple days of disruption and not being able to feed or milk our cows to where you would damage our industry beyond repair.
Wow, that's
It's intense.
yeah, a couple days, and the whole industry is wrecked.
Yeah, it makes you realize how fragile this whole system really is.
And it makes you wonder, what happens to the price of milk or cheese, if suddenly there aren't enough people to take care of the cows.
That's what I'm thinking. Like, are we going to see like, $10 a gallon milk or something?
Right, exactly. I mean, it's basic supply and demand, right?
Right.
Fewer workers, less product, higher prices.
Ugh, I don't want to think about it.
Yeah, it's not a pretty picture, and, it's not just a small number of workers we're talking about here.
How many were we talking about?
So get this, a Department of Labor survey found that 44%
Yeah.
of the 2.4 million farm workers in the U.S. are undocumented.
That's almost half.
Yeah, it's a massive number, and it really makes you, like, how effective are our current immigration policies if we end up with this many undocumented workers?
Right. It seems like there's a disconnect somewhere.
Yeah, and it's not just about filling jobs, it's about filling jobs that a lot of Americans just aren't willing to do.
Really?
I mean, economist David Ortega was saying, these are tough jobs.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Long hours, you're out in the hot sun all day. It's physically demanding and the pay isn't great.
Not exactly glamorous.
No, not at all. And it's so different from, that whole they're stealing our jobs narrative that you hear sometimes.
Yeah, it's more complicated than that.
Way more complicated. And this guy, Narup at the dairy guy, he had this anecdote that really drives that point home.
What was it?
So he was talking about this contractor who was trying to fill 6,000 farm jobs last year.
That's right.
And they only got 30 applications from American workers.
Yeah,
Out of
wow.
those 30, they only hired 2 people.
2 people out of 6,000.
And get this, neither of them even stayed until the harvest.
That's crazy.
It is. And, it kind of makes you wonder if those jobs really are there for the taking.
Yeah, like you always hear, oh, there are plenty of jobs out there.
Yeah.
But then you hear stories like this, and it's like, well, maybe not.
Right. So you have this tension, between what Trump is promising on the campaign trail and the potential economic fallout. If
Yeah.
we actually start deporting people on a large scale.
Right, because if you get rid of all the workers, who's going to do the jobs?
Exactly. And, some people are optimistic, like this California dairy farmer, Tom Barcelos. He thinks that common sense will prevail and that agriculture will be spared.
He thinks they'll make an exception.
Yeah, he's hopeful, but not everyone shares that optimism.
Who's not so optimistic?
Well, Nairabout, for one, he's pretty frustrated.
Yeah, I bet.
He's been dealing with this issue for decades, and he's just seen inaction from politicians for years and years. And he even said, we as an industry wonder if there's lack of political will to solve the problem because the problem presents itself as a great political fundraiser and stump speech.
So basically he's saying they're using it as a talking point, but they don't really want to fix it.
Yeah, that's kind of the feeling, and it leaves the agricultural sector in a really precarious position.
Yeah, they're caught in the middle of this political battle.
Exactly. And, it's not just about the farmers themselves, it's about all of us. It's about our food supply.
Right, because if they can't produce the food, then what happens?
Exactly. And that's something we're going to dig into a little bit deeper in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's take a break and we'll be right back with more on this fascinating topic.
Sounds good.
Welcome back. So we've been talking about like all the problems, right? Like what could happen if all these workers get deported, but what are some solutions? Like what could actually be done about this?
Well, one thing that gets brought up a lot is this idea of like a guest worker program, specifically for agriculture.
Oh, okay. So like a special visa or something.
Exactly, like a visa just for farm work so people could come in legally and work, for a season and then go back home.
So that way they're not like, overstaying their welcome or whatever.
Right, and it would give the farmers like a reliable workforce, they'd know they could get the workers they need every year.
But what about wages? Wouldn't that like drive down wages for everybody?
Yeah, that's a concern, for sure. Some people say it would hurt both American workers and foreign workers.
Right, because if you can get someone to do the job for cheaper, then why would you pay someone else more?
Right, and there's also the worry that these guest workers could be exploited, if they're tied to one employer and they can't really leave.
Oh yeah, that's not good.
No, it's not. So it's all about finding that balance, like protecting the workers, but also making sure the farmers can actually run their businesses.
It sounds complicated.
It is. And then there's this other idea that gets tossed around a lot, which is like a path to citizenship for the undocumented workers who are already here.
Oh, so the people who are already working in agriculture could become citizens.
Yeah. And that would obviously like get rid of the fear of deportation for a lot of people.
And it would mean they could like come out of hiding and, pay taxes and stuff.
Exactly. And a lot of people think that's the best solution, because these workers are already here. They're already contributing to the economy.
But I bet some people would say that's like rewarding people for breaking the law.
Oh, for sure. You hear that argument all the time. But the people who support this path to citizenship, they say, like, look, it's more practical to just acknowledge the reality of the situation.
Like it's not going to help to just pretend they're not here.
Right. Ignoring the problem doesn't make it go away.
I guess that makes sense.
And, it's probably not going to be one solution or the other. It's probably going to be like a combination of different things.
So like maybe some guest workers and some path to citizenship and who knows what else.
Yeah, and each solution would have to be like tailored to the specific needs of the industry and the workers.
Man, it's a lot to think about.
Mhm.
Like what can like regular people do if they want to get involved in this issue?
I mean, the first thing is just to stay informed, like read articles like the one we're talking about today.
Don't just like get your news from like memes and stuff.
Exactly, like dig a little deeper, do your own deep dive into the issue.
And don't be afraid to like talk to people who have different opinions than you.
Yeah, exactly, like challenge your own assumptions and be open to learning new
And
things.
maybe even like write to your congressman or something.
Absolutely, like let your elected officials know that this issue matters to you.
Remind them that like food is kind of important.
Yeah, and that the people who work so hard to put food on our tables, they deserve to be treated fairly.
It's easy to forget about that sometimes.
It is, but at the end of the day, we're all in this together.
Yeah, food is something that unites us all.
It really does. And I think this deep dive has shown that, the issue of immigration and food, it's way more complicated than we might think.
Yeah, there's no easy answers,
Right.
but the more we understand the problem, the better chance we have of finding solutions.
Uh,
So what are your thoughts? What stands out to you as we continue this conversation? What other aspects of this issue should we be thinking about?
It's amazing to me, like how much this whole like deportation thing, like how much it connects to like everything else.
Yeah, it's like this tangled web.
It's not just like about food, it's about immigration. It's about workers' rights. Like it even ties into like national security in a way.
It really shows you how like one policy decision can have all these like ripple effects, and it makes you think like how much do we actually rely on immigrant labor?
It's kind of like we take it for granted until something like this happens.
Yeah, and then it's like, wait a minute, if all these workers are gone, then who's going to do all the work?
And like all that talk about like protecting American jobs, it kind of falls apart when you realize that like a lot of Americans don't even want these jobs.
Right. It's like the jobs are there, but nobody wants to do them.
Exactly. And it's easy to get caught up in like the statistics and the politics, but like at the end of the day, this is about real people. Yeah, like these are people's lives we're talking about.
And I'm curious, like, beyond the immediate impact, like, what are some of the bigger implications of this whole thing?
Well, think about it. Like, what happens if food prices go way up because there aren't enough workers?
Oh, man. Yeah, that would not be good.
It would hit low-income families the hardest, you know?
The people who can least afford it.
Exactly. And that can lead to all sorts of problems, like social unrest, health problems. It's like a domino effect.
Scary to think about.
It is, and it shows that this is something that affects all of us.
It's not just a farmer problem, it's like a society problem.
Exactly. And I think that's something that policymakers really need to consider. Like, what are the long-term consequences of their decisions?
Yeah, they need to think beyond just like the next election cycle.
For sure. So as we wrap up this deep dive, like, what's the one thing you want listeners to take away from this?
Hmm, that's a good question.
Like, what's the big takeaway message?
I think it's that this whole issue of immigration and food, it's just way more complex than it seems on the surface.
Yeah, there's no easy answers.
No, but the more we understand the problem, like the better chance we have of finding solutions.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to remember that this is just the beginning, you know?
Yeah, like this deep dive, it's just a starting point.
Exactly. Like, keep asking questions, keep learning, keep having conversations about this stuff.
It's been a really thought-provoking conversation. And, I think it makes you really appreciate, like, how connected everything is.
It does.
Like, the next time I'm at the grocery store, I'm going to be thinking about all the people who helped put that food on the shelves.
Yeah, me too.
It's like their stories are part of our story.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of food and politics and all the people who keep us fed.
It's been a pleasure.
Till next time, stay curious and remember, every bite you take tells a story.